The incredible variety of ancient construction technologies can be roughly divided into two categories. The first includes dwellings that could be built by a single family in a relatively short time. People in the past were usually tied to their economic roles, like farming or crafting. In most of Eurasia, with its pronounced seasonality and significant temperature fluctuations, summer, the ideal season for building, was also the peak of agricultural work. Natural materials like clay and wood didn't lend themselves to lengthy construction projects. A house left without a roof before autumn rains or winter frosts could be damaged. So it's no surprise that many ancient pit houses and semi-dugouts were tiny by today's standards, around 12 to 16 square meters, and on that modest space, families spanning multiple generations likely lived. Historical evidence suggests that simple stoves could heat at least 20 to 25 square meters, so the minimal size wasn't just about conserving heat. Personally, I think doubling a house's size would take more than double the effort and time. That's why there was a second category of homes, those built by communities or skilled craftspeople. Large residential structures have existed since the Paleolithic era. Interestingly, even Neanderthals, not just our direct ancestors, built houses exceeding 60 square meters. A great example is the Molodovo Eye site on the Dniester River. Starting in the Neolithic period, Europe saw the rise of longhouses, some exceeding 150 square meters, which likely housed up to 30 people. In antiquity and the Middle Ages, where population density was high, housing was often built by peasant communities or professional craftsmen. For the latter, construction was their primary income source. It's important to remember that civilization has always flourished in cities, and cities require dense multi-story buildings, a constant challenge for builders. Today, building a foundation is as simple as digging a pit, pouring concrete, and waiting. Concrete reaches half its strength in 10 days and ideally needs about a month to fully cure, not too long. In the past, lime-based mortars, sometimes mixed with volcanic ash, were used. These took much longer to harden than modern cement. To construct something massive, builders would dig a deep trench and lay a sturdy stone and later brick wall bound with lime mortar to serve as the foundation. Back in 2006, I participated in the re-excavation of the foundation of the first stone church in Russes, the Church of the Tithes. It involved an enormous amount of stone transported from far away. Hard to imagine the sheer physical labor involved. That's why it's no surprise to me that medieval builders mostly relied on log structures and what we now call post and beam timber frame houses. Wood is a very strong material, nearly as resistant to compression as brick. But unlike stone, it's also resistant to tension and bending. Where stone would crack, wood could flex or deform slightly without compromising the structure. A well-built log house with strong interlocking joints has excellent seismic resistance. I've even read that if Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been built using timber frame techniques instead of stone, casualties from the atomic bombings would have been far higher. But the main advantage of wooden structures is that they don't require massive foundations. Even if one corner of the building settles, it usually won't collapse. It's hard to say exactly where log construction originated. As I've mentioned in another video, the oldest examples were found by archaeologists in the Czech Republic. There's also evidence that some techniques were brought to Russes from Scandinavia. Later, poorer communities in what's now Norway improved the method further. Lacking large-diameter logs, they developed what's now known as lafteverk construction. This involves flattening two sides of a log, creating something similar to today's timber homes, with walls of more uniform thickness. However, fully wooden houses had drawbacks. They required significant amounts of wood, skilled carpenters, and considerable labor. But the biggest issue was their high fire risk. This wasn't as much of a problem for rural homes in villages and hamlets. But for cities, log construction wasn't ideal. The history of every major Rus city includes multiple catastrophic fires per century, often wiping out most of the settlement. Some even argue this is one reason so few written records from that era have survived. Still, there was a popular alternative to log construction: timber-framed houses. The most famous example of this is half-timbered houses. This technique is sometimes credited to Roman legions, who built fortifications in conquered European territories. They used a wooden frame filled with clay and stones. After the empire fell, barbarian tribes adapted the method for their needs. A sturdy timber frame was built and the gaps were filled with unfired bricks, clay, or stone. This approach made the structure rigid while saving on the foundation. Many half-timbered houses have survived to this day, standing for over 5 centuries. For instance, Quedlinburg is often called the half-timbered capital of Germany, with over 1,600 such houses, some more than 600 years old. Since most of the wall is clay, these homes are harder to burn down than fully wooden ones, especially if the roof is made of turf or tiles. A slightly simplified version of the half-timbered house is what's commonly known as wattle and daub, or adobe houses. While in Europe this method dates back to Roman times, similar structures have been used in the East for millennia. For example, the Horyuji Temple, near the ancient Japanese capital of Nara, is a wooden frame structure that's around 1,400 years old. That said, traditional half-timbered homes, like the Japanese minka, are incredibly intricate constructions. The complexity comes from the high cost of nails back then, which led to the widespread use of sophisticated joinery systems requiring exceptional craftsmanship. When European settlers arrived in North America, they initially built homes similar to those in Europe, often starting with log cabins. Fun fact, some even set world records in log building. Unlike Europe, where land was scarce and carefully parceled out, American farmers often had vast plots of land. Under the Dawes Act, for instance, indigenous people who chose to assimilate and farm received land grants of 160 acres, about 64 hectares. To put this into perspective, the typical Russian peasant plot in the 19th century was usually less than 5 hectares. But with all that land came challenges. By the mid-19th century, the U.S. population was only about 30 million, and many farmers lived far from towns. Hiring a team of builders who'd have to travel hundreds of kilometers, often by horse, wasn't easy or cheap. On top of that, nails remained expensive for a long time. In Virginia, there was even a law forbidding people from burning down their houses during a move just to recover the nails. Things began to change between the late 18th and 19th centuries, as the cost of nails dropped tenfold. In the early 19th century, machines were invented in Britain and the US that could quickly produce nails from iron rods. Around the same time, the US became a major exporter of timber. In 1790 alone, New England exported over 16 million tons of wood in the form of planks. With the timber industry booming, cheaper nails, and a lack of skilled carpenters willing to travel long distances, experimentation led to a breakthrough: balloon framing, also known as the Chicago method. In the 1830s, someone looked at the abundance of cheap boards and relatively affordable nails and had an idea. Why not build a frame out of lightweight boards and sheath the structure with the same material? The first building using this method was a warehouse in Chicago, constructed in 1832. At first, these buildings weren't taken seriously. The term balloon frame itself means something light and insubstantial, not exactly inspiring confidence. Yet, decades later, these buildings were still standing. By the 1860s, the introduction of wire nails, mass-produced by machines, brought prices down even further. It's worth mentioning that nails are a fastening material designed to handle heavy loads. Modern screws, for instance, aren't suitable for wooden load-bearing structures because they're made from a hard but brittle metal.
What does this tell us? It means that if the structure shifts a bit, or if certain stresses are applied, the nail will simply bend, but the structure will still likely remain intact in 99% of cases.
The new type of frame construction that emerged in the 19th century became popular for one key reason beyond cheap lumber and nails. It was incredibly simple for people to build their own homes. In a way, it was a return to the idea of individuals, rather than communities or professional builders, constructing their homes. Farmers, while not carpenters by trade, were handy enough to put together a frame using boards. Unlike heavy logs or massive timber beams, boards are lightweight, meaning one or two people could handle much of the work. Farmers often needed not just houses but barns and other large structures, so simplicity and efficiency were key. Despite what modern marketers might claim, it was this affordability, ease of assembly, and reduced need for heavy labor that made frame construction so popular. However, it's worth noting that medieval half-timbered houses and similar post and beam technologies aren't direct ancestors of modern frame houses. The latter require mass-produced boards and cheap nails, which only became available in the 19th century. An exception might be Japanese wooden houses, which borrowed techniques from older technologies and still use large beams and intricate joinery. Over time, the balloon frame gave way to platform framing, which used shorter boards and made homes safer in case of fire by reducing the height of continuous cavities. Today, frame construction is one of the most versatile methods, accommodating a variety of sheet materials, insulations, including those resistant to rodents, and soundproofing membranes. The framing itself doesn't even have to be wooden. It can be made from metal, for example. But let's not forget, we live in the age of aggressive marketing. If you search for videos on construction methods, you're likely to find either glowing reviews or harsh critiques. Frame houses, whether light panel constructions or timber frames with strong joinery, are great for seismic areas. Other options include solid concrete structures or block houses reinforced with monolithic columns. In all other cases, it's crucial to remember that frame technology was designed as a simple, affordable method for building homes, particularly suited for self-builds. If a frame house ends up costing more than a stone one, it's not worth praising just because that's what they use in the US and Canada. In these countries, it caught on as an affordable, practical solution thanks to farmers, and later became a tradition adopted by construction companies in the 20th century. If we talk about energy efficiency, any house built with modern methods can now be insulated.